What you just said is frontal assaults on our sovereignty. The AP has written very plainly, it says that it's fake news. They've debunked it entirely. They said, they can't give away sovereignty. The agreement doesn't promise to give away sovereignty. Even if it did, if it were a real treaty, it'd have to be ratified by the Senate, and it wouldn't have binding effect. The courts could overrule it. All of those things have been used to debunk this, but I've looked at it. I first questioned it when you brought it up, and I know you're right on this. Let's start with the first one. Doesn't the Senate have to ratify it if it's a treaty?
Well, actually, no, it doesn't. There are now very few instances where the Senate actually goes through the formal ratification process. The vast majority of treaties are now, with, I guess, the Senate's sort of blessing, albeit not formal, dealt with as executive agreements by the president, requiring nothing more than his signature. And even things that should have been very much treated as treaties, like, for example, the whole climate change, claptrap, and the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal. These were not dealt with as treaties by the Senate, and we are the worse for that arrangement being practiced. Should they be treated as treaties? Under our Constitution, 100%. And what's so important about this, Kevin, is, I know you appreciate this about them. The framers of our Constitution were brilliant men. And what they came up with was this elaborate structure in this Constitution of ours to try to prevent the abuse of power. Checks and balances, if you remember anything from your civics courses, if you're of an age where we still taught that. But the point is, they also understood that something precisely like what's afoot right now could also create abuses of power and fundamentally transform, to use Barack Obama's expression, the Constitution of the United States. How so? A corrupt, malfeasant, perhaps treasonous president making a deal with some international power or entity that would have direct impact on our Constitution, on our freedoms, on our checks and balances. And they said the Senate will have to serve as the watchman on the wall for that. They will have to be the quality control mechanism. And not only that, but they said this is such an important responsibility that we're actually going to make it obligatory that to be approved by the Senate for its ratification, a treaty has to get a 2/3 majority. That's a high bar.
Well, that's an important point, because at that point, when that was written, the Senate represented the individual states. And you're right, Frank, I've looked at it. The Justia law says very clearly, it says the executive agreement has surpassed in number and perhaps in international influence the treaty formally signed, submitted for ratification, and proclaimed. And then the Senate itself says, in recent decades, presidents have frequently entered the United States into international agreements without the advice and consent of the Senate. These are so-called executive agreements. They're not brought before the Senate for approval. Executive agreements are still binding on the parties. And here's the scary thing. They're binding on the individual states. So if the World Health Organization is going to take away sovereignty, well, they say, well, they're not taking it from the federal government. Well, that's an argument that could be made, but you cannot make the argument that they're not taking it away from the states. They are absolutely. So it wouldn't be Ron DeSantis' health policy. It wouldn't be Greg Abbott health policy. It would be the WHO health policy, and the states wouldn't have any say in it.
That's absolutely right. Tedros Ghebreyesus will not only be your new doctor, he will be the new arbiter. And again, folks, don't take our word for it. We saw what he did in the pandemic. That was bad enough without the kind of authorities that he will have now.